They didn't text you. They didn't call. Nothing happened. And yet, something felt different, like a quiet shift, like a thought that wasn't yours, but still felt like it came from you. And you paused for no reason, at least no reason you could explain. Because sometimes the strongest signals between people aren't spoken. They're felt. And here's the part most people ignore. You don't always notice when someone is thinking about you until you learn how to listen. In this video, you're going to understand something subtle but powerful. Not magic, not coincidence, but a pattern, a method, something that once you see it, you won't be able to unsee. But there's a warning here, because once you start recognizing these signals, you'll also start realizing who isn't thinking about you. And that changes everything. Now think about this for a moment. There's always that one person, not necessarily the loudest, not the most obvious, but the one who somehow stays in your mind longer than they should. You don't talk every day, sometimes, not even often, but something about them feels unfinished, unspoken, like there's a thread between you that never fully breaks. And then it happens. Out of nowhere, you think of them, not casually, not like a passing memory, but suddenly, deeply, almost emotionally, like they entered your mind without knocking. And for a second, you feel them. If you've ever experienced that, type 1 in the comments. Not for engagement, but because acknowledging it means you've felt something most people ignore. Now, here's where things start to get interesting, because what you're feeling is not random. It's not just memory, and it's not just attraction either. It's something deeper, something tied to how certain people process emotions and how those emotions travel. Let's talk about empaths, but not in the usual way, not the surface level idea of someone who feels a lot. That's incomplete. An empath doesn't just feel emotions. They absorb patterns. They read subtle shifts in tone, in energy, in behavior, even when nothing is said. And here's what most people miss. Empaths don't connect through words. They connect through consistency of feeling, through emotional signals that repeat over time. So when someone thinks about them, really thinks about them, it doesn't stay contained. It leaks through memory, through behavior, through attention. And this is where the method begins. Because if you want to feel when someone is thinking about you, you don't try to force a signal. You learn to recognize the pattern. But here's the first layer most people never understand. And this is important. Pay attention to this. You spend time with someone. You open up just enough. You create moments, not dramatic ones, just real ones. Conversations that linger. Silences that feel comfortable. Eye contact that lasts a second longer than usual. If that person is emotionally receptive, especially if they're an empath, they don't just remember the moment. They store it differently, with detail, with emotion, with meaning. Now here's where it gets subtle, because once that imprint is created, it doesn't disappear. Even if you leave, even if you stop talking, even if time passes, the brain, specifically the emotional centers like the amygdala, doesn't categorize these moments as finished. It categorizes them as open loops. And open loops always seek closure. So what happens? They think about you, not intentionally, but repeatedly, triggered by small things. A place, a word, a feeling, and here's the key insight. Every time they revisit that memory, they're recreating the emotional state you share, which means, on some level, you feel it too. Not because of something mystical, but because emotional connections, once formed deeply, create feedback loops in perception. And this is where everything starts to change. Because the feeling you get when someone is thinking about you is often your mind recognizing a pattern before your logic catches up. But here's what most people miss. It's not just about connection. It's about what you do after that connection is formed. And this is where things either deepen or break silently. In the next part, we're going to talk about something even more important. Why certain behaviors make someone think about you constantly, and others make you disappear from their mind completely. And once you understand this, you'll start seeing exactly why some people never truly leave your thoughts. But here's what most people miss. Connection alone is never enough. You can create a powerful emotional imprint and still disappear from someone's mind over time. Not because they forgot you, but because something slowly broke the signal. And this is where everything changes. Because the same person who once felt unforgettable can become distant if certain behaviors start to replace that connection. You stop acknowledging their emotions, not in a loud way, not aggressively, but subtly. You ignore what they feel, you change the topic. You respond logically when they needed presence. They say something that matters to them, and you answer with something that makes sense, but doesn't feel like anything. Or worse, you minimize it. It's not that serious. You're overthinking. You're too sensitive. Now here's what happens inside them, especially if they're emotionally aware. They don't react immediately. They don't argue. They don't demand attention. They pause. They observe. They start pulling back internally because for them, feeling understood is not optional. It's the foundation. And when that foundation cracks, they don't try to fix it loudly. They adjust silently. This is the part no one tells you. Dismissal doesn't hurt once. It accumulates. Each time you overlook their feelings, their brain starts to register a pattern. This person doesn't see me. And the brain doesn't like repeating environments where it feels unseen. So what does it do? It protects emotionally, subtly, gradually. The connection that once felt natural starts becoming filtered. They stop sharing certain things. They think twice before opening up. They start editing themselves without telling you. Now here's the shift, and you need to pay attention to this. They don't stop thinking about you immediately. In fact, for a while, they think about you more. But the quality of those thoughts changes from warmth to confusion, from connection to questioning. Why didn't they understand me? Was I expecting too much? Did I imagine the connection? And slowly, their mind starts associating you, not with comfort, but with emotional friction. And this is where the signal weakens, because people don't keep thinking about those who make them feel invisible. They think about those who make them feel recognized. But here's where it gets even deeper, because emotional dismissal doesn't just reduce connection, it changes how memory is stored. Neuroscience shows that emotional validation strengthens memory encoding. But invalidation, it creates avoidance patterns, which means the more you dismiss someone emotionally, the less their brain wants to revisit you. And when the brain stops revisiting you, the feeling of being thought about disappears. Not suddenly, but gradually. And this is where most people get confused, because they think they just stopped caring. But that's not what happened. They adapted, and here's the part most people never see coming. Even while pulling away, they still remember you. But they stop feeling you. And once that happens, the connection becomes one-sided. Now let's go one layer deeper, because emotional dismissal is just the beginning. There's another behavior, far more damaging, that doesn't just weaken the signal, it distorts it completely. And when this happens, the person doesn't just pull away, they start protecting themselves from you. In the next part, we're going to talk about manipulation and emotional guilt, and why it creates one of the strongest internal conflicts in someone's mind. A conflict that keeps them thinking about you, but in a way that slowly destroys the connection. But here's what most people miss. Not all thinking is connection. Sometimes someone thinks about you more because something feels wrong. And this is where everything shifts. Because there's a difference between being remembered with warmth and being remembered with tension. You start using emotion as leverage, not always intentionally. Sometimes it's subtle, almost invisible. You say things like, "After everything I've done for you, I guess I just care more than you do. You've changed." Or you withdraw affection just enough to make them notice, just enough to make them question themselves. You don't directly ask for what you need. You imply it through disappointment, through silence, through pressure, and this is where everything changes. Because instead of connection, you introduce control. Now, inside them, something very complex begins. They don't just feel hurt. They feel conflicted. Part of them wants to stay connected, to fix things, to understand you, but another part starts feeling uneasy because emotional guilt doesn't feel like love. It feels like responsibility, like obligation. And here's what most people never realize. Empaths are highly sensitive to emotional imbalance. So when affection becomes conditional, when care starts feeling like a transaction, they feel it immediately, even if they don't say anything. This is the part no one tells you. And you need to pay attention to this. Guilt creates a loop in the brain, a loop that sounds like this. If I don't respond the right way, I'm hurting them. If I pull away, I'm the problem. If I stay, I'm losing myself. And that loop is exhausting. So what happens? They start overthinking, replaying conversations, analyzing tone, trying to predict your reactions. And for a while, this actually increases how often they think about you. But here's the truth. This isn't connection. This is mental strain. The brain isn't revisiting you because it feels good. It's revisiting you because it hasn't resolved the tension. And this is where everything changes. At some point, the mind stops trying to fix the loop and starts trying to escape it, because the brain naturally moves away from environments that feel draining. So instead of leaning in, they begin to pull back quietly. Gradually, they stop explaining themselves. They stop reacting the same way. They stop engaging emotionally, even when they're still physically present. And here's a key shift. They no longer think about you with curiosity. They think about you with caution. And that feeling you once had, that sense that someone was thinking about you, starts changing. It becomes heavier, less clear, more distant, because emotional guilt doesn't build connection. It distorts it. Now here's something deeper. This is where most people get it wrong. They think, if someone thinks about me a lot, it means they care. But that's not always true. Sometimes they're thinking about you because they're trying to understand what went wrong. And this is where everything shifts in a way you don't see coming. because eventually they stop trying to understand you and start understanding themselves. And when that happens, they begin to detach. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but internally. And this is the moment most people miss, because from the outside, everything still looks the same. But on the inside, they've already started leaving. And this is where the method becomes clearer. If you want to feel when someone is thinking about you, you need to understand why they're thinking about you. Is it connection or is it conflict? Because only one of those creates a signal that feels clear. The other creates noise. And in the next part, we're going even deeper. We're going to talk about something that breaks connection faster than anything else: boundary violation. And why crossing someone's internal limits doesn't just push them away, it rewires how they experience you completely. This is the part that decides whether you stay in someone's mind or slowly disappear from it. But here's what most people miss. Connection doesn't break loudly. It breaks when something inside you feels crossed. Not in words, in feeling. There's a point in every emotional connection where a person draws a line, not physically, internally, and the moment that line is crossed, everything changes. At first, it's small, almost invisible. You interrupt them when they're speaking. You push for answers when they're not ready. You assume access to their time, their attention, their energy. You think it's closeness. They feel it as pressure. And this is where everything shifts. Because when someone feels like they can't say no freely, they stop feeling safe. They may still smile, still respond, still show up, but something inside them starts pulling back. You won't notice it immediately. Most people don't, because they won't confront you. They won't argue. They won't explain where the line was. They'll just adjust. They start creating space where there used to be openness. They pause before replying. They think before sharing. They hold back parts of themselves that used to come naturally. And here's the part no one tells you. They're not doing this to hurt you. They're doing it to protect themselves. Because once a boundary is crossed, the brain marks it as a threat. Not a danger, but a pattern. And the brain is very good at remembering patterns, especially emotional ones. So now every interaction with you gets filtered, not through connection, but through caution. They begin to ask themselves questions they never asked before. Will they understand this? Will this be respected? Or will I feel the same discomfort again? And slowly, they stop taking that risk. Now here's where it gets deeper, because even after pulling back, they still think about you, but not in the same way. Before, thinking about you felt calm, familiar, safe. Now, it feels layered, complicated, uncertain. They replay moments. They analyze your behavior. They try to understand where things shifted. But here's what most people miss. This kind of thinking doesn't bring people closer. It creates distance, because the brain isn't revisiting you to reconnect. It's revisiting you to protect itself from repeating the same feeling. And this is where the signal starts changing. That subtle feeling, that sense that someone is thinking about you, becomes unclear, heavier, less defined, because emotional safety is what keeps a connection alive in someone's mind. And when that safety is disturbed, the connection doesn't disappear immediately. It weakens quietly, and eventually they stop associating you with ease. They start associating you with effort. And the brain doesn't hold on to effort for long. It lets go, not suddenly, but slowly. This is why some people feel like they're being thought about constantly, And then suddenly, nothing. No signal, no presence, no emotional pull. Because the moment someone stops feeling safe around you, they begin the process of letting you go internally. And this is where everything changes. Because once someone starts protecting their energy from you, they don't come back the same. Even if they stay, they're already different. But here's the deeper truth. And this is the part no one talks about. People don't leave when boundaries are crossed once. They leave when they realize their boundaries won't be respected consistently. And once that realization settles in, the connection begins to fade. Not because they stopped caring, but because they started choosing themselves. And when that happens, the feeling you once had, that sense that someone is thinking about you, begins to disappear. Not because they forgot you, but because they've stopped feeling safe enough to stay connected to you mentally. In the next part, we're going to go even deeper. We'll talk about something that silently destroys connection over time. Lack of reciprocity, and why one-sided emotional effort doesn't just drain a person. It slowly removes you from their inner world completely. This is where people don't just pull away. They stop including you in their thoughts. But here's what most people miss. Connection isn't built on moments. It's built on balance, not perfect balance, not equal in every second, but enough that both people feel seen, felt, considered. And the moment that balance disappears, something inside the connection starts to collapse. At first, it's subtle, almost unnoticeable. They're the one who checks in, the one who remembers small details, the one who asks how you're doing and actually listens. And you respond. Sometimes, not always with the same depth, not always with the same presence, but enough to keep things going. And this is where everything slowly begins to shift. Because effort, when it's one-sided, doesn't stay invisible. It accumulates. At first, they don't mind. They understand. They give more. They lean in because they feel something real. And when something feels real, people invest. But here's the part no one tells you. The brain keeps track of emotional investment. Not consciously, but through feeling, through a quiet awareness that sounds like this. I'm giving more. I'm showing up more. I'm caring more. And for a while, they ignore it. They justify it. They tell themselves, maybe they're just busy. Maybe they express differently. Maybe I'm overthinking. But here's where everything changes. That maybe doesn't last forever. Because eventually, patterns become clear. And when patterns become clear, the emotional weight becomes real. Now every interaction starts to feel different. Not because you changed suddenly, but because the imbalance is now visible. They start noticing what's missing. The questions you don't ask, the effort you don't return, the moments you don't show up for. And slowly, they begin to feel something they didn't feel before. Not anger, not even sadness, something quieter, disappointment. And disappointment is dangerous because it doesn't explode. It settles, it sits quietly in the background and reshapes how someone sees you. Now here's the deeper layer. Pay attention to this. When emotional effort isn't reciprocated, the brain starts to reduce investment. Not out of punishment, but out of protection, because the brain doesn't sustain environments where energy is constantly drained. So what happens? They start giving less, not dramatically, not in a way you immediately notice, but gradually they stop asking as many questions. They stop initiating as often. They stop reaching out first. And this is where most people get confused. Because from your perspective, nothing feels wrong. But from their perspective, everything feels different. And here's the key shift. They're not trying to fix the connection anymore. They're observing it. And once someone moves from participating in a connection to observing it, they're already halfway out. Now, let's go even deeper. Because even while pulling back, they still think about you. But the thoughts change. Before, you were someone they looked forward to. Now, you become someone they evaluate. Do they really care? Is this worth my energy? Why am I the only one trying? And slowly, those questions replace the feeling. And this is where the signal fades. Because people don't keep thinking about those who make them feel like an option. They think about those who make them feel valued. And when that feeling disappears, so does the emotional connection. Not instantly, but steadily, until one day they realize something simple. I'm no longer receiving what I'm giving. And that realization changes everything. Because from that moment on, they stop investing. And when someone stops investing emotionally, they stop including you in their inner world. They stop thinking about you in the same way. Not because you meant nothing, but because continuing to think about you no longer feels good. And this is the part most people never see coming. The absence of reciprocity doesn't just weaken connection. It quietly removes you from someone's thoughts. And once that happens, the feeling you were once chasing completely disappears. In the next part, we're going even deeper. We'll talk about something even more subtle, inauthenticity, and why pretending to be someone you're not doesn't just confuse the connection, it breaks trust at a level most people don't even realize. This is where someone doesn't just pull away, they stop believing in what they felt with you. But here's what most people miss. Connection isn't just about what you do. It's about whether what you show is real. Because people don't connect to perfection. They connect to authenticity. And the moment something feels off, even slightly, the mind starts asking questions. At first, it's small, almost unnoticeable. Your words don't match your actions. Your tone shifts depending on the situation. You say what sounds right instead of what feels true. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, but enough to create a subtle inconsistency. And this is where everything begins to change. Because emotionally aware people don't just listen to what you say. They observe how it feels over time. And when that feeling becomes inconsistent, trust starts to weaken. Not loudly, not all at once, but quietly. They start noticing the gaps, the moments where something didn't quite align, the times where your presence felt different, the energy that didn't match your words. And here's the part no one tells you. The brain is extremely sensitive to inconsistency, especially emotional inconsistency, because consistency creates safety and inconsistency creates doubt. So now, instead of feeling connected to you, they start analyzing you, not intentionally, but naturally. Was that genuine? Did they mean that? Why did that feel different this time? And slowly, their attention shifts from experiencing the connection to questioning it. Now here's where it gets deeper. Because once doubt enters a connection, it doesn't stay isolated. It spreads into everything. The way they interpret your words, the way they remember past moments, the way they anticipate future interactions. And this is where everything changes. Because instead of feeling you clearly, they start feeling uncertainty. And uncertainty doesn't create emotional closeness. It creates distance. Now, pay attention to this. Even in this state, they still think about you. But the nature of those thoughts shifts again. Before, thinking about you felt natural. Then, it became conflicted. Now, it becomes questioning. Was any of it real? Did I misunderstand them? Was I connecting to who they are or who they were pretending to be? And those questions slowly disconnect the emotion from the memory. Because the brain struggles to hold on to something it no longer trusts. Now let's go even deeper. Trust is not built through words. It's built through repeated alignment. When what you say, what you feel, and how you act all match. And when that alignment breaks, even slightly, the emotional bond starts to weaken. Not because the moments didn't matter, but because they no longer feel reliable. And here's the key shift. Once someone stops trusting the connection, they stop relying on it emotionally. And when they stop relying on it, they stop revisiting it, which means they stop thinking about you the same way. Because thinking about you no longer brings clarity. It brings confusion, and the brain doesn't hold on to confusion. It lets it go. Not immediately, but gradually, until one day, you're no longer a thought that appears naturally. You become a thought that only appears when something triggers it. And this is where the signal fades almost completely. Because emotional clarity is what keeps someone present in your mind. And once that clarity is gone, so is the connection. But here's where everything reaches its deepest point, because there's one final layer that quietly destroys connection more than anything else. Not imbalance, not inconsistency, but something even more subtle. Emotional invalidation, gaslighting, the quiet rewriting of someone's reality. And when this happens, the person doesn't just pull away. They disconnect completely. Not just from you, but from how they once felt about you. In the next part, we're going to break this down. And this is where the realization begins. The moment where someone doesn't just stop feeling you, they understand why. And once that understanding clicks, they don't come back. But here's what most people miss. The deepest damage in any connection doesn't come from distance. It comes from confusion, not confusion about what happened, but confusion about what was real. And this is where everything breaks. It doesn't start with a fight. It doesn't start with silence. It starts when someone begins to doubt their own experience. You tell them, that's not what I meant. You're overreacting. You're remembering it wrong. And maybe from your side, it feels harmless, like clarification, like explanation. But on their side, something very different happens. They pause, not because they're convinced, but because they're unsure, and that uncertainty does something dangerous. It disconnects them from their own perception. Now, instead of trusting what they feel, they start questioning it. Did I misunderstand? Was I too sensitive? Am I the problem? And this is where everything changes. Because once someone starts doubting their own emotional reality, they lose the one thing that keeps connections stable: inner clarity. Now pay attention to this. The brain needs consistency, not just from others, but from itself. When what you feel and what you're told don't match, the brain enters conflict. And conflict, when repeated enough, creates emotional exhaustion. Not the loud kind, not the visible kind, the quiet kind, where someone is present but drained, where they respond but feel disconnected, where they stay but no longer feel like themselves. And this is the moment everything shifts, because they stop trying to understand you and start trying to protect their own mind. They begin to trust their feelings again, not by arguing, not by explaining, but by stepping back. And here's the part most people never see coming. They don't leave suddenly. They leave after they already left emotionally. By the time you notice distance, they've already processed the confusion, already made sense of the patterns, already decided that staying will cost them more than leaving. And this is where the method becomes clear. That feeling, that sense that someone is thinking about you, it only exists when the connection is clean, when it's based on truth, on consistency, on emotional safety, not pressure, not confusion, not imbalance. Because the mind doesn't revisit what drains it. It revisits what feels right. Now let's shift perspectives for a moment. If you're someone who lost a person like this, someone who once felt deeply connected to you and now feels distant, this is not about chasing them. It's about understanding what changed, not in them, but in the dynamic, because people don't disappear from your life randomly. They leave when staying stops feeling aligned with who they are. And if you're the one who feels everything deeply, the one who notices, shifts, others ignore, the one who sometimes thinks about someone out of nowhere, you're not imagining it. You're responding to patterns, to emotional memory, to connections that were never fully resolved. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. Not every thought means connection. Sometimes it's just your mind revisiting something that once mattered. And that's okay, because clarity is more powerful than attachment. And once you understand the difference, you stop chasing feelings and start recognizing truth. So the next time you suddenly feel like someone is thinking about you, pause. Don't rush to interpret it. Don't immediately assign meaning. Just observe. Ask yourself, does this feel calm, clear, grounded, or does it feel heavy, confusing, unsettled? Because that difference tells you everything. Empaths don't need perfection. They don't need constant attention. They need honesty, consistency, emotional safety. And if that's not present, they won't stay long enough to explain why. Because real connection doesn't leave you guessing. It leaves you certain. And once that certainty is gone, so is the reason to stay. So don't just ask, are they thinking about me? Ask something deeper. Did the connection feel real or just intense? Because intensity fades. But what's real stays, even in silence, even in distance, even when no one says a word. And that is something you don't need to chase. You just need to recognize